the court decision was handed down that established corporations as individuals under the law. They have the same rights of freedom of speech, and then later court decisions equated a dollar bill with freedom of speech. So as it is now, a corporation, which is not a person, a physical, human body, can actually have freedom of speech under our laws. What would you do to move things in the direction that restore our democracy and control of government, where money does not have an inordinate sway over politics in our system?
Well, what I've done, what I would do, but what I've done, I think, again, I make the point here to you, and I will over and over again all day, the amount of time we have to us. It's very important to hear not only where I'll take you, but where I have been on all of these issues, so that your confidence level can be raised by someone not just pandering to an interest here with 28 days to go before a caucus. I have long held the belief and supported the efforts, managed legislation on the floor of the Senate here to have public financing of campaigns here. And I'll tell you why. This is more threatening in many ways. When Bill Clinton first got elected, many of us were told he was calling around to get advice as to what his priorities ought to be. And I remember thinking maybe I might get a call. And if I did, I put a little note on my refrigerator in my apartment in Washington. Sure enough, he called. And I remember having the conversation. It's not a good sign. I'm going to get that on the website. That he called and he asked what the key issue was. And the answer I gave was the three-word answer I'd written on that note: campaign finance reform. And I'll tell you why. I mean, there are a number of reasons why, and you've identified them in your question. But it does two things that people usually don't talk about very much. We talk about what the contaminating influence is on decision-making. And the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, equating money with speech, was a devastating decision. The money to speech is ludicrous on its face, and yet it's been a major problem for us to get around that Supreme Court decision. But two other aspects of the absence of public finance or campaign finance laws that reduce the influence of money are rarely discussed. One is it shrinks the pool of people who might otherwise seek a public life. How many people are we losing who take one look at this and say, there's no way in the world I can even begin to think about standing for public office? I'm not talking about the presidency. I'm not talking about the United States Sen or being governor. I'm talking about running for county supervisor in Iowa. I'm talking about running for the state legislature in states today. It's becoming inordinately expensive or difficult to the point where you either have to have the wealth to do it yourself or the access to it. So there is this shrinking quality of the number of people we ought to be drawing upon in our society that are willing for a period of time or whatever to serve their country. Simultaneously, the absence of this kind of reform expands the number of people who become terribly disillusioned about the political process in our nation. We ought to be doing exactly the opposite here, expanding the pool of people who might stand for office and consider running and doing a job on behalf of all of us, and shrinking the level of cynicism associated with the level of money in politics. I mean, it is nauseating in a sense to watch what's happened in this state over the last year. I'm not poverty-stricken in a campaign. I'm out there doing my best to raise the money. We've raised somewhere around $15, $18 million over the last year or so to campaign in 4 states here. Any other time, that would be considered more than an adequate amount to get around and do a job and get people to help out. The idea that some candidates have raised $70, $80, $90 million, spending $6 million on advertising here in the state of Iowa, where 120,000 people may show up on caucus night, is outrageous, in my view. And if our decisions are based on wealth and celebrity, then we are in far deeper trouble than you can imagine. And I will do everything in my power to see to it that we have laws in this nation that reduce the amount of money in politics, hopefully even public finance. Dick Durbin has the latest bill in. I'm a sponsor of it and a supporter of that idea. And if as president I can get the Congress to go along, we'll do something like that. It's the only way I know to restore some faith in this process.
Your best estimate today of the percentage of the gross domestic product that is controlled by the federal government, and where you would like to see that number be at the end of 8 years of the Dodd presidency?
The number off the top of my head, how much is controlled by the federal government. But I'm a strong believer early on. So back, I'm a pro-growth Democrat. In fact, I offered a pay-as-you-go budget back in the early 1980s here. I'm a great believer in fiscal responsibility, something this administration has abandoned entirely, despite all the assumptions people make that Republican administrations are a better manager of the country's economy. I'm about to tell you a statistic that every time I say it, I'm finding myself disbelieving myself when I hear it. But I've checked it out over and over again. It's accurate. This administration in 6 years has accumulated more debt than the entire previous 42 administrations combined. That's a difficult achievement. You think of it. In 6 years, you got to go back to George Washington, up through Bill Clinton, and add all of the debts accumulated by 42 administrations over 220 years, and they've accumulated more debt in 6 years. So we have a war in Iraq, for instance, which is costing us $10 million a month, $2 million a week, where 18 and 19-year-olds are putting their lives on the line, and my 2-year-old is going to get the bill for it. Because that's what we're doing. We're passing on the cost of these obligations to this younger generation that's just arrived in this world here. So I will insist upon a far more discipline, far greater discipline in this process here, wherever possible. Healthcare is a major consumer of the gross domestic product of the country. It's now getting close to 20% of that GDP is healthcare here, $2.2 trillion a year. It's not that we're spending too little money on healthcare. Arguably, we're spending too much because of the mismanagement of it, how the incentive structures drive up costs, don't reduce them. A lot of time is spent on up to $50 million without healthcare. Those who have it can't afford it because premiums have gone up 87%. The cost of a GM automobile, one of them, has a $1,500 healthcare cost per automobile. By comparison, a Toyota has a $150 healthcare cost per automobile. That is costing our country tremendously. The use of fossil fuels, carbon-producing fuels, have a huge cost, both health-wise to us, as well as, of course, the climate implications and what it means for our country as well. So we need to have, in my view, and it's not going to happen all at once, it's going to take time to reverse this massive problem that's been created overnight, to have an administration that is fiscally disciplined here, will insist that we have far greater participation by all sectors of the economy here to provide those kind of opportunities. The best social program in the world is a job in the private sector, I believe here. And to have economic policies here that reflect and encourage and develop those concepts here are going to be essential if we're going to grow and provide that level of opportunity for people. So I'm determined to get this thing under control again here, so that we don't saddle my children, my 2-year-old and 6-year-old, with the problems that this generation has failed to face on its own. A rather short answer to a much broader question. And by the way, you're the first person almost in 7 or 8 months that's brought up, and then these debates, an economic issue. We'll talk about 10 minutes on UFOs, but we don't have a conversation about the economy of our country, so I thank you for raising the question.